The last thing Feldwebel Werner Brandt heard was not an engine, not a warning shout from his tail gunner, but a sound like the sky itself was being torn apart. A deep, continuous roar that lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then his Heinkel He-111 bomber became a coffin of fire and falling metal somewhere over the English Channel. 20,000 feet above the Kent coastline, Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reardon watched the German bomber spiral downward, trailing black smoke against the August blue. His thumb lifted from the firing button. 8 Browning machine guns fell silent, their barrels still hot enough to burn flesh. In 3 seconds, those guns had sent nearly 600 rounds of .303 caliber ammunition into the enemy aircraft. The mathematics of death in 1940 were brutally simple. Tommy pulled his Hurricane into a climbing turn, scanning for threats. The sky was chaos, contrails crisscrossing like white scars, distant specks that could be friend or enemy, the occasional flash of sunlight on canopy glass. Below, the channel glittered with cruel indifference. Somewhere down there, men were drowning or burning. Tommy forced the thought away. Thinking got you killed. Red 2, on your left, Angels 15, coming down. The voice in his headset belonged to Pilot Officer Edward Ashworth, Teddy, his new wingman. 19 years old, fresh from training, flying his 3rd combat mission. The boy had good eyes, Tommy saw them now. For Messerschmitt Bf 109's diving from the sun, the oldest trick in aerial warfare. German fighters were faster than Hurricanes in a dive, but Tommy knew something the textbooks didn't teach. He knew that at 400 miles per hour, a pilot's blood drained from his brain during hard turns. He knew that fear made men pull too hard on their sticks. He knew that the Hurricane could turn tighter than anything the Luftwaffe flew. Red 2, break left on my mark. 3, 2, mark. Tommy hauled his aircraft into a punishing turn. The horizon spun. His vision grayed at the edges as the G-forces tried to steal consciousness from his skull. Behind him, cannon shells from the lead 109 passed through the air where his Hurricane had been a heartbeat earlier. The German overshot. They always did when they were eager. Tommy reversed his turn, and suddenly the enemy fighter filled his windscreen. The reflector gun sight painted an orange circle on the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Tommy pressed the button, the sound filled the cockpit, not the sharp crack of individual shots, but a sustained mechanical roar. The British called it many things. The Germans had their own name, Brent Holly. The roaring hell. 8 guns firing together at 1100 rounds per minute each created something more than noise. It was a weapon in itself, a sound that announced death was arriving. The Bf 109 shed pieces like a wounded bird losing feathers. Its propeller stopped. The canopy flew off, and Tommy glimpsed a figure tumbling into the void, the pilot, bailing out. One small mercy in a merciless sky. Red 2, status. Tommy called, static. Then, trembling, I'm here. There was one on me. I don't know where he went. He's gone. Form up on my wing. We're low on ammunition. They limped back to RAF Church Fenton as the summer sun began its descent. The airfield appeared beneath them, grass runways, scattered buildings, a few ground crew waving them in. Tommy counted the other Hurricanes landing. 8 had taken off. 5 returned. On the ground, Teddy sat in his cockpit for a long moment, unable to move. When he finally climbed down, Tommy saw the dark stain on the young man's flight suit. Some men wet themselves in combat. It meant nothing about courage. It meant only that the body understood what the mind refused to accept, that they had been seconds from death, and would be again tomorrow, and the day after, until the mathematics finally caught up with them. You did well, Tommy said. I didn't hit anything. I fired and I don't think I hit anything. You survived. Today, that's enough. That night, in the dispersal hut, Tommy sat alone with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. The names of the missing pilots hung in the air like ghosts: Patterson, Davies, young Morris who had joined the squadron only last week. He thought about the German bomber crew, wondered if any of them had gotten out before the aircraft hit the water. Probably not. Across the channel, in a French airfield lit by harsh electric lights, Staffel Commander Klaus Hoffmann reviewed the day's losses. 3 aircraft. 3 pilots. His younger brother among them, shot down over Canterbury by a British fighter whose guns made a sound like nothing else in the war. Klaus stared at the mission reports until the words blurred. Tomorrow he would fly again. Tomorrow he would hunt the men who made that terrible sound. Tomorrow he would try to kill them before they killed him. This was the war now. This was everything. The summer of 1940 had only just begun its bleeding. 3 weeks changed everything. 3 weeks turned boys into killers and killers into ghosts. By the 1st of September, Tommy Reardon had stopped counting the faces that disappeared from the mess hall. The mathematics had become too heavy to carry. Dawn painted the white cliffs of Dover in shades of rose and gold as Tommy stood at the edge of the runway, watching the light spread across the channel. He had slept perhaps 3 hours. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion that had seeped into his bones like winter cold. Behind him, boots crunched on gravel. Beautiful morning for dying, Teddy said. He was smoking now. He had never smoked before the war. Tommy turned. The boy he had shepherded through those first terrified missions was gone. In his place stood something harder, leaner, with eyes that had seen too much to ever fully close again. 5 confirmed kills. The squadron's 3rd highest scorer. And something broken behind the confidence that worried Tommy more than any German fighter. We're up in 20 minutes, Tommy said. Big show today. Intelligence says they're coming for the airfields again. Good. I'm tired of waiting. That was the problem. Teddy wasn't tired of waiting. He was tired of living with what he had done, and he had found that combat was the only place where the memories fell silent. Tommy recognized the symptoms because he had seen them before, in pilots who flew straight into enemy formations, who took risks that made no tactical sense, who secretly hoped the mathematics would finally catch up with them. The Luftwaffe came at 10,000 feet, a formation so vast it darkened the sky. 60 bombers in tight defensive boxes, Heinkel 111s and Dornier 17s bristling with machine guns. Above them, weaving like silver sharks, flew the fighter escort, Messerschmitt Bf 109s tasked with keeping the British interceptors away from the precious bombers. Tally-ho! The call came from squadron leader Peters, and 12 Hurricanes rolled into their attack dives. Tommy had developed new tactics in those 3 weeks. The old approach, diving into the formation, turning and burning in classic dogfight style, got pilots killed. The Bf 109 was faster in a straight line and could outclimb the Hurricane. Playing their game was suicide. Instead, Tommy taught his flight to attack like wolves. One pass, all guns blazing, then climb away before the escorts could react. Never turn. Never engage in a fair fight. There was no honor in air combat. There was only survival. He came down on a Heinkel from the port quarter, the angle that minimized exposure to the bomber's defensive guns. His thumb found the firing button. The Hurricane shuddered as 8 Brownings roared to life. That sound, always that sound, the continuous mechanical scream that haunted German pilots in their nightmares. The bomber's wing root erupted in sparks and flame. Tommy saw the No. 2 engine catch fire, saw the aircraft begin its death roll toward the English countryside below. He didn't watch it fall. He was already climbing, already scanning for the next threat. Red 2, brake right. 109 on your tail. Teddy didn't brake right. He broke left, directly into the path of the diving Messerschmitt, his guns already firing. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of risk that got pilots killed. The German, faced with a head-on attack he hadn't expected, flinched. His burst went wide. Teddy's didn't. The 109 came apart in midair, its fuel tanks igniting in a blossom of orange flame. Teddy flew through the debris cloud, his Hurricane emerging trailing smoke from a dozen small impacts. Red 2, what the hell was that? 6 confirmed. Teddy's voice was flat. Empty. I want 10 before they kill me. The fight devolved into chaos. Hurricanes and Spitfires mixed with Bf-109s in a swirling maelstrom of aircraft, the contrails creating a mad tapestry across the sky. Tommy fired twice more, damaged a bomber, possibly killed a 109, the confirmations would come later, if they came at all, then he saw him. A single Bf-109, separated from its flight, turning hard to engage a damaged Hurricane. Something about the aircraft caught Tommy's attention, the markings, perhaps, or the way it flew with a veteran's economy of motion. He rolled in behind it, closing the distance. The Germans saw him coming. The 109 reversed its turn with brutal precision, and suddenly Tommy was no longer the hunter. For 15 seconds they dueled, each pilot pushing his aircraft to the edge of its limits, neither able to gain advantage. Through his canopy, Tommy glimpsed the enemy pilot's face, young, focused, utterly determined. For one frozen moment, their eyes met, then the German's fuel warning light must have flickered, because the 109 broke off, diving for the channel and home. Tommy let him go. He was too low on ammunition to chase. That evening, Klaus Hoffmann landed in France with 17 bullet holes in his aircraft and the memory of a British pilot who had almost killed him. He had seen the man's face through the canopy. He would remember it, and somewhere in England, Tommy Reardon wrote 3 more names on the list of the dead, and wondered how many more names the summer would demand. London burned. From 20,000 feet, Tommy watched the East End docks disappear beneath pillars of black smoke that rose like the fingers of a dying god reaching for heaven. September 7, 1940. The day the Luftwaffe made its greatest mistake. For weeks, German bombers had hammered RAF airfields. Runways cratered, hangars destroyed, radar stations reduced to rubble. Fighter command was bleeding out. 2 more weeks of that punishment, military historians would later argue, and Britain's air defense would have collapsed entirely. Then the bombs fell on London, and everything changed. Tommy didn't know the strategic implications as he dove toward the bomber formation. He didn't know that Hitler had shifted targets in a rage after British aircraft bombed Berlin. He knew only that the pressure on his airfield had lifted, that his ground crews had finally repaired the damaged Hurricanes, that he had slept 6 hours for the first time in a month. And he knew that below him, civilians were dying in their homes. The mathematics of war had always been abstract: pilots killed, aircraft destroyed, missions flown. Now it was personal. Those fires below were schools and hospitals, shops and homes. Children were burning while he watched. All flights, engage. Hit the bombers. Ignore the fighters unless they're on you. Squadron leader Peters's voice crackled with barely controlled fury. Tommy pushed his throttle forward. The Merlin engine screamed its 1,000-horsepower response. He selected a Dornier at the edge of the formation, the vulnerable position where defensive fire was weakest. His gun sight settled on the cockpit. This time, he didn't think about the crew. He didn't think about the men inside who had families, who had been told they were fighting for their country, who believed in something enough to climb into an aircraft and fly to their probable deaths. He thought about London. He pressed the button. The Brownings roared. 600 rounds in 3 seconds. The Dornier's cockpit disintegrated in a spray of metal and glass. The bomber rolled onto its back and fell, a dead thing obeying gravity's final command. Red leader, 109's coming down, 4 o'clock high. Tommy broke hard left. Cannon shells sparked off his wing, punching holes through aluminum skin. He glimpsed the attacker, a Bf-109 with yellow nose markings, the sign of an experienced unit. The German was good, staying with him through the turn, waiting for the shot that would end everything. Then Teddy was there. Red 2 came in from nowhere, guns blazing, forcing the 109 to break off its attack. Tommy used the moment to reverse, and suddenly he was behind the German fighter, close enough to see the rivets in its fuselage. He knew this aircraft. The markings, the way it flew. This was the pilot from before, the one who had escaped him over Kent. Fate or coincidence had brought them together again. The 109 tried to dive away, their standard escape maneuver. Tommy followed, his Hurricane screaming in protest as the airspeed climbed past safe limits. The world compressed to a tunnel, target, gun sight, trigger. He fired, the sound filled his universe, that terrible, beautiful sound that defined this war. The 109's engine cowling erupted. Oil sprayed across the canopy. The German's propeller windmilled to a stop. Through the smoke, Tommy saw the pilot look back. Their eyes met for the second time. Two men who had tried to kill each other, connected by something neither could name. The 109's canopy flew off. The pilot, Klaus Hoffmann, though Tommy would not learn his name for months, tumbled into the void, his parachute blossoming white against the black smoke rising from London. Tommy pulled up, his hands shaking on the stick. He had won. He had survived. The mathematical equation had balanced in his favor once again. Below, Klaus drifted toward the English countryside, watching his aircraft spiral into a farmer's field. He was a prisoner now. The war was over for him. But as he descended, he heard it one last time, that sound, rising from somewhere in the chaos above. Other British fighters engaging other German bombers. The roaring hell that had killed his brother, that had nearly killed him, that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. That night, September 15, 1940, the day historians would later call the climax of the Battle of Britain, Tommy landed a Hurricane with 63 bullet holes and a seized engine. He had 3 confirmed kills. The Luftwaffe had lost so many aircraft that Hitler would postpone Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Britain would survive. But as Tommy sat in his cockpit, unable to find the strength to climb out, he felt nothing like victory. He felt only the weight of the dead, pressing down on him like the sky itself had turned to stone. The battle was ending. The war was just beginning. The prison camp in Kent was not what Klaus Hoffmann had expected. No barbed wire gauntlets, no brutal guards, no interrogation cells. Just a converted country estate where captured German officers walked the grounds under the watchful eyes of bored sentries, waiting for a war that had left them behind. That he had been there 6 weeks when the British officer came. Klaus recognized him immediately, not the face, exactly, but something in the way the man carried himself. The exhaustion that seemed woven into his bones. The eyes that had seen too much death to ever fully rest. This was the pilot who had shot him down over London. Klaus was certain of it. Staffelkapitän Hoffmann. The British officer spoke German with a terrible accent. Flight Lieutenant. Klaus gestured to a bench beneath an oak tree whose leaves were turning gold with autumn. You came. I requested permission. I don't entirely know why. They sat together in silence for a moment, two enemies who had tried to kill each other, separated now by nothing but a few feet of English earth. Above them, a formation of hurricanes droned toward the channel. The war continued without them. Your guns, Klaus said finally. I have a question. Ask. Why did they sound like that? Not like machine guns. Like something else. Tommy, and Klaus would learn his name before the conversation ended, explained. 8 Browning guns synchronized to fire together, nearly 10,000 rounds per minute combined. The concentration of fire that made the Hurricane and Spitfire so deadly, the wall of lead that could destroy a bomber in a 2-second burst. Klaus nodded slowly. We called it the Brand Holly. The roaring hell. My brother, he stopped. My brother was killed by that sound. I heard it on a radio intercept, from his bomber's transmitter. The last thing he heard. I'm sorry. Are you? Tommy considered the question honestly. I don't know. I'm sorry your brother is dead. I'm not sorry we defended our country. No. You shouldn't be. Klaus looked up at the sky. I would have done the same. I did do the same. How many of your friends did I kill? I don't know. I stopped counting after a while. The numbers became too heavy. Yes, Tommy said. They did. They talked for an hour, then 2. Not about tactics or strategy, not about the politics that had sent them to kill each other. They talked about home. Klaus spoke of his family's farm in Bavaria, the smell of fresh bread from his mother's kitchen, his younger brother's laugh. Tommy spoke of Manchester, of his sister Mary, of the factory where his father had worked for 30 years making parts for aircraft engines, perhaps the very engines that powered the Hurricanes. When the guard signaled that visiting time had ended, Klaus stood and offered his hand. "I saw you hesitate," he said. "When you had me in your sights, before you fired. For a moment, you hesitated. Why?" Tommy had no answer. Perhaps he had seen a man instead of an enemy. Perhaps exhaustion had slowed his reflexes. Perhaps some part of him had simply been tired of killing. He shook Klaus's hand and walked away without responding. 3 months later, Klaus was transferred to a permanent POW camp in Canada. Tommy was promoted to squadron leader and given command of a new squadron. The war ground on, North Africa, the Eastern Front, the long bombing campaigns that would reduce German cities to rubble. The mathematics continued their terrible counting, but something had changed. When Tommy trained new pilots now, he taught them more than tactics. He taught them that the men in the other cockpits were men, not monsters. That killing was necessary but never clean. That the sound of 8 guns firing, that terrible, beautiful Brrrt that had saved so many British lives, was also the last thing thousands of German boys had heard before they died. The Battle of Britain ended without a formal surrender, without a signed treaty. It simply faded as autumn turned to winter and the Luftwaffe turned to night bombing. RAF Fighter Command had lost 544 pilots killed. The Luftwaffe had lost more than 2,500 aircrew. Britain had survived. The invasion would never come. 25 years later, on a summer day in 1965, 2 old men walked through an overgrown airfield in Kent. The dispersal huts were gone, the runways cracked and sprouting weeds. Only the control tower remained, a hollow shell where radar operators had once vectored fighters toward incoming enemies. "I still hear it sometimes," Klaus said. His English was perfect now, refined through decades of correspondence and occasional visits. "When I cannot sleep." "The sound." Tommy nodded. His hair was gray, his hands spotted with age, but his eyes still held the weight of those summer days when the sky had been full of death. "So do I." They stood in silence, watching clouds drift across the same sky where they had once tried to kill each other. Somewhere in that silence, echoing across the years, the sound of 8 guns still roared. Not in anger anymore. In memory. In mourning. In the strange, fierce love that soldiers feel for their enemies, the only ones who truly understand what they survived. The war was over. The sound would never fade.